out of the four elements, when we're looking at water and fire, these are what are said to be or perceived to be the most feminine and the most masculine out of the four elements. Water can be our seer, our mirror, to help us bring forth the unconscious, the things we aren't yet conscious of. Hey, welcome to our second episode in the Elemental Ritual series. If you missed the first episode, I highly recommend you go ahead and watch that one. That's the one on the earth element. Otherwise, we'll get started here if you're happy picking up from episode 2. So this is a 4-part series where we go through 4 episodes, each one going through the 4 main elements of Gaia. I went through this in the last episode, but if you're not going to go back and have a watch, I'll just quickly give you a reference. This is all the information to give you context of what it is when we're talking about the 4 elements here at Somatic Body. So if you're already inside the Feminine Harmony program that I offer and you're already up to collective body modules, you'll already be familiar with this. If you've done one-on-one sessions with me, you'll also be familiar with this. If you've bought my Energy Clearings Compendium, you will also be familiar with this. However, if you are not, feel free to screenshot this, read it, take it all in, or you can even pause this, just so you have some context with where we're coming from and the viewpoint that we're coming from when we start to go over these elements and how to put them into practice and use each element as medicine in ritual. So today we're going over the water elements. Now, the water element is particularly powerful when it comes to doing any feminine embodiment rituals, because out of the 4 elements, when we're looking at water and fire, these are what are said to be or perceived to be the most feminine and the most masculine out of the 4 elements. I mentioned in the last episode that everything around us is interwoven and everything has a masculine essence and feminine essence, and there's this equilibrium, and it's never 50-50. It's always like shifting and evolving, and there's always this energy exchange. But when it comes to water and fire, these are seen as water, the most feminine of the 4 elements, and fire, the most masculine of the elements. We also have earth, which is also seen as a more feminine vibration, and air as a more masculine vibration. But secondary to what we would see as water and fire, our main yin and yang, our main feminine and masculine when it comes to the properties that these elements offer us as medicine. So water, also known as hydromancy. You can surround yourself with water, interpret her movements, reflections, gain insights. There's also those negative ions when we hop into a body of natural water, such as a natural spring or ocean. I touched on this a little bit in the last episode. And so there's this beautiful, flowing, ever-moving, flexible, and intuitive aspect to water. So it is very feminine when we think about it that way. When we're working with the medicinal properties of the water element, we're working with emotions, intuition, subconsciousness, and this particular element can be used to focus on feminine creativity, feminine wisdom, intuition, surrender, nurturing, cleansing, and rebirthing, because it's a little more, it's not as stagnant as the earth element, or I shouldn't say stagnant, but not as slow moving as the earth element. The earth element's really grounding and stabilizing when we're talking about that as a feminine energy, whereas the water is more flowing and momentum. Let's get things going. It's like the peak feminine energy, but more in an introspective dream state. The mind is switched off, but the unconsciousness is really flowing and surrendering. Water is where we're surrendering. Think about a storm. Her power and her waves are fierce. In the eye of a storm, it's still and clear. But when we are working with a storm and her waters, there's nothing we can do but surrender. I had a family member recently who had spinal shock, was stuck underwater and couldn't move. They were paralyzed. They were essentially passing on, but what they did is they did their breath work, they surrendered, and I truly believe that the water element came in and assisted with her medicine of just surrendering. And you know what? He's totally fine now. Miracle. But I also, again, I believe in this medicinal elements and properties. So for me, that was a really eye-opening experience that kind of instilled what I believe when it comes to these 4 elements. You know, I think for that particular family member, that was also an experience of their own in their connection and their relationship to the water element as well. Is that like you've just got to go with the flow of life, right? That surrender. And water can also be used in a sense as a seer. So when we think about when the water is still and calm, when it's not boiling over or waves crashing everywhere, when the water is still and calm, we see our reflection. We are able to reflect back to us what we cannot see yet clearly. Water can be our seer, our mirror, to help us bring forth the unconscious, the things we aren't yet conscious of. And so there's that feminine wisdom coming through, that unconscious dream state wisdom coming through within the water element as well, which is really where that cleansing comes in, because you're bringing forth things that you can't yet see and surrendering to what arises and just letting go what you no longer need. There's that cleansing element to her momentum as a feminine force. So when we are working with the water element and her medicine, we have lunar water. So water infusions, you can use them for other elements as well. I talked about this in the earth element episode. When we're talking about lunar water, the reason we don't just have a water infusion, which is just water, is because it already is water, right? So when we talk about the feminine essence coming into water and how this is our most feminine essence, we can work with lunar water. The moon is another medicine that is very, very feminine. And when we think about the sun, that is very masculine. We work with fire when we think about the sun. And so by infusing the moon's essence into a water, into an infusion, this is where we can really bring the potency of feminine essence. And again, this is where I was saying we can really bring water into any feminine embodiment ritual or practice that we want to do. So to do a lunar water, you just place this under the moonlight. You can pick the phase that you want. If you're not sure about moon medicine and the vibrations of the moon and the phases, I have my moon medicine masterclass that you can register for, pre-recorded, watch it in your own time. That's on my website too, and you can learn a little bit more about that and how you can work with lunar water. But it essentially works the same way I discussed with herbal water infusions in the last episode. You want to infuse the medicine of the moonlight, whatever phase it's in, by soaking the water in direct moonlight. So overnight, you'd wake up the next morning, and then from there you can do whatever it is within ritual that you would like to do. You can consume the water. You can anoint areas of the body. You can anoint or bless a certain object you want to work with, for example. But this is in essence what lunar water is, and that's how we work with the water elements and bring in an even more potent feminine energy by combining it with the essence of the moon and her medicine. Then we have water immersions, which I talked about earlier, where we're stepping into a body of water, we're soaking a certain area of our body in this water, and it's usually a natural body of water, such as the ocean or a natural spring or a natural river, for example. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a body of natural water. You can also create a beautiful alkalizing bath, for example. You can add your Epsom salts, your bicarb soda. You can add herbal infusions, so bringing in the feminine essence. You can add essential oil in and make it feel sacred, and you can still work with that water that's come through the tap. So there is no right or wrong here. You just do what feels right for you. I'm simply just giving you ideas and talking about what I've come to learn and what I've come to know. Then the last one we have is water gazing. I touched on this briefly, where the water is still, we're looking at our reflection and we're using it as a seer, gazing into a bowl of water or a body of water, whether it's a natural spring or a bath, for example. This is where we can receive insights. And you can also do this with fire gazing, which we'll talk about in the next episode. And so this is also known as water scrying. And so that is essentially how we would work with the water element and her properties and her medicines. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And as I would say in every other episode, just remember that when you're doing these rituals, these practices, you're not only doing the practices, you're also then taking that next semi-comfortable step forward. If we're striving for growth or we're desiring growth in some way, some kind of change, there will be an element of discomfort. But just doing it, whatever that next step is, however small, however big, that's going to help instill the ritual that you're doing and bring it forth. So you're not kind of just sitting back and waiting for it to happen passively. Within the feminine and the masculine, there is still momentum, as we just talked about with the water element. And so it's always important to take that next step after you do a ritual, but one that feels safe and holy for you, feels right for you. So just treat yourself with reverence and grace and take that next step. And that will really help instill whatever the practice is that you're doing and help you to honor your forward growth, your future growth. I hope you enjoyed this episode on the water elements, and I will see you in the next episode where we're going to be talking about the fire elements.